China has reported a further fall in COVID-19 infections. The country saw 30 fresh imported cases and 1 local transmission. No new infections were reported in Hubei province yesterday. 4 deaths were, however, reported in Hubei. So this brings the total number of confirmed cases on the mainland to just over 81,400, with more than 3,300 deaths. China has imposed restrictions on all international flights in and out of the country in a bid to stop imported cases of COVID-19. And this comes on top of an earlier announcement that all foreigners, including those with valid residence permits and visas, will be temporarily banned from entering the country. Our correspondent Lynette Lim flew into Shanghai late on Friday night, just before the restrictions took effect, and she tells us what her experience was like.
It was a physically and mentally exhausting journey. All in, it took me about 25 and a half hours from my plane in Singapore to reaching this quarantine hotel room in Shanghai. The process took this long because there were a lot of stringent checks upon arrival at the airport. There were a few pit stops on the way. On the plane, it took about 5 hours. At the airport, it took about 6 hours. There was a lot of waiting on your feet, standing around, filling out both physical and electronic forms, answering questionnaires, and going through interviews with enforcement and medical personnel. People were eventually sought into districts they lived in and then bussed to these district testing centers where we have to take a mandatory COVID-19 test. We'll also have to wait for the test results at the test center before we can then be commuted to the quarantine facilities or your homes for quarantine, where we have to spend the next 14 days. The next stop at the test center was the longest part of the journey, and this was how I was feeling at the time. It's been more than 6 hours since I landed at Shanghai's Pudong Airport, and the journey isn't over yet. I've just taken a COVID-19 test which involved nose and throat swabs. From here, I will try to get some rest while I await the test results, which is due in 8 to 10 hours time. If I get the all clear, I'll be able to return home to serve my 14-day home quarantine. It took me about 12 hours at the testing center. I unfortunately was not able to do my quarantine at home because my residential compound did not agree to it. This is apparently quite common, and the reasons could range from your home being connected to some common areas, thereby rendering it unsuitable, or your residential compound not having adequate enforcement resources to be able to accommodate you. But I can't complain, I'm one of the luckier ones. At a testing center where we had to wait long hours for our test results, we had to sleep there. My testing center was actually a budget hotel that the government had booked for such a use. Other people in districts like Xuhui and Changning, for example, they had to sleep on lounge chairs in sports halls, and some had to wait for long hours in makeshift tents in the cold. The next day, I got the call that I had tested negative, and I was able to leave with other people that had tested negative on a bus that would take us to our homes or central quarantine hotel in Shanghai. From here, there was more paperwork, but finally, I could get a shower and a lie down.